Hoops Postgame here on 93.7 The Ticket. I'm Jake Bakoven in studio. We're just on stream because on our regular dial, we've got NFL playoffs coming up. Of course, a big weekend in football in the NFL, and we're proud to have those games going on here. But we do also want to give a little bit of a celebration, have our own little celebration with Nebraska in their victory over Northwestern. Jumping back from a two-game losing streak after knocking off number one Purdue. It's been a little bit worrisome. A lot of people may be sweating it out there at Pinnacle Bank Arena, but Keisei Tamanaga with the big shot late to really put the final nail in the coffin against Northwestern. They weren't able to get a bucket in the final couple possessions there as Nebraska really clamped down on defense. Nebraska needed this one. 7 straight losses to Northwestern as a program. If you're watching the broadcast, you could tell it's kind of been one of those years to get rid of a lot of those streaks. And here is another one. It's hard to imagine that it's 7 straight losses Northwestern. You kind of think of Nebraska and Northwestern kind of on the same level, but that hasn't been the case in the last couple of years. Northwestern, obviously, one of the top coaches in the Big Ten. They've been one of the top point guards in the Big Ten in Boo Buie, who really struggled today. Shout out to Nebraska's defense for getting that done. And just overall, Nebraska gets the win, all-important win to go to 14-5 overall and stay above 500 or get back to 500 in Big Ten play. I can go through some of the numbers here as we see it. Of course, a big storyline in today's game. There were plenty of them, but one of them was that Juwan Gary was not going to be available for Nebraska. And so somebody or a few people were going to have to step up and really do what he does, which is very difficult to do because he does a lot of the things that don't show up on the stat sheet. And, obviously his ferociousness, his rebounding would have been helpful late in the game against Rutgers. But I think Nebraska did a pretty good job. I mean, this was a well-rounded effort. This was nobody went off for 20 and just really led this Nebraska basketball team. In fact, he had 5 scorers in double figures, and then Rink Mass, who played an all-around really well game with 8 points. So we can run through the leading scorer, actually, Josiah Alec, who Nebraska often used as a mismatch. He was the replacement for Gary in the starting lineup. He finished with 15 points on 4 of 5 shooting, 5 rebounds, and 2 assists for him. Rink Mass, also in the starting lineup, like I said, 8 points, 8 rebounds, 6 assists. A good bounce-back game from him as he struggled with his matchup against Rutgers, specifically with him looking where to pass the ball and making cuts and just staying with it. That's always going to be part of Rink Mass games. Jamarcus Lawrence, 2 big threes to open the second half. He finished with 10 points for the Huskers, 5 rebounds, 3 assists. And Keisei Tamanaga, 14 points. Like I said, the huge 3 there late that really kind of put this game away. 2 of 4 from beyond the arc for him and 6 points for Keisei Tamanaga. The other starter, Bryce Williams, consistent with his 12 points, 3 of 5 from the line, 4 of 6 from the field, including 1 of 2 from deep. Also threw in 4 rebounds. Coming off the bench for Nebraska, CJ Wilcher. You talk about a big bucket in a part of his game, and CJ that, he's kind of known as the shooter. He's made a lot of good cuts and really improved his game, but just going to get a bucket when Nebraska needed it most to kind of fight off Northwestern, who's really, it was a back and forth second half. I mean, a second half of streaks, and one of those main streaks, Northwestern was really putting the clamp down on Nebraska and them getting anything to fall. And CJ Wilcher driving to the lane was able to get over the 7-footer, his wingspan from Northwestern, and get a bucket there. Very important. I would say the 2 most important of his 10 points tonight or this afternoon, as he was 2 of 4 from beyond the arc, 4 of 7 shooting. Sam Hoiberg contributing 2 as well, 2 points, and how about 6 rebounds from the undersized guard? Don't tell him I said that. And Eli Rice also contributing with 4 points, 2 blocks. Pretty good defensive performance from him, 4-4 from the line. And as Nebraska once again gets this win over Northwestern. And like I said, I mean, I think these are pretty evenly matched teams. Like I said, Nebraska now 14-5, Northwestern 13-5. They're going to be close in the Big Ten standings all year long. And you could easily make the excuse for Nebraska they don't have Rashawn Gary, or that they don't have Gary, and that maybe that would be difficult, or if you had the loss, you kind of have that excuse in the bag, right? Well, Northwestern is going to walk away from this game thinking, man, I have not seen Boo Booey struggle quite that much in his time in Evanston. And this was just a difficult game from him. You have to contribute that to a lot to the defensive prep for Nebraska, a lot to the way that they were just kind of guarding him and not letting him get to his spots. But Boo Booey never shy to shoot. Sure wasn't shy. 2 of 15 from the field, 9 points overall because he did get to the line and hit 4 of 5 from there. But hey, if you walked into this game and told me Boo Booey, one of the leading scorers in the Big Ten, averages 20, was just going to get 9, I'd say Nebraska would be in a good spot. Now, Barnhizer, he went off in the second half, and he really helped Northwestern kind of get back in that game, crawl out of their halftime deficit. And there were certain times when he just kind of felt like the best player on the floor, at least the best player at that moment. He had 24 for Northwestern. Langborg hit a lot of different threes, 15 points total for him. 4 of those buckets of his being from beyond the arc. So Nebraska, not always who you expect. Boo Booey was kind of the main defensive assignment for this game. But Barnhizer certainly coming on. It'll be interesting to see if Nebraska matches up later with Northwestern and see kind of the return trip and see if that game kind of turns out similar to this one, because this was a good game. Again, back and forth. Nebraska needed the win. Nebraska got the win. Once again, I'm Jake Bakov, and this is the Hoops Post Game Show, brought to you by Action Plumbing, Heating, and AC, and Electrical, excuse me. And of course, another reason why this was a big game, and if you went out to Pinnacle Bank Arena, you might have saw it, Alumni Weekend going on. And very cool. Obviously, Eric Strickland, who's part of this show, was recognized. He was out there throwing T-shirts around. And very cool, obviously, to see Danny Nee as well. Danny Nee, one of the best coaches, if not the best all time at Nebraska, really had a lot of those early 90s, late 80s teams on a roll and in the spotlight, being top 10, top 25 type of teams. And it's just been fun with this coming up to talk with Strick, to talk with people that have been around the program for that long and kind of think of those early 90s teams, because it's a bit of a different conversation than when we think about Nebraska basketball now. Strick will tell you when he was committing to Nebraska, they were a top 25 team, if not a top 10 team in program that he was committing to. And Nebraska, as we know, has struggled since basically letting go of Danny Nee. And it's been a long time through a lot of different coaches. But hopefully Fred Hoiberg can get this group going. It feels like a team that's got as good of a shot as any, maybe since, the 99. I think there's been one NCAA tournament since then. We all remember that, Tran Petaway and Walter Pitchford and Tim Miles and Siobhan Shields and those guys in their run. This Nebraska basketball team feels like they can get there. And it's funny because if you listen to Coach Hoiberg throughout the week, you had to kind of fight against the noise, right? There was a lot of noise this week about letting games go. That Rutgers game, you had a big lead. You had 2 chances in regulation, under 10 seconds to get the winning shot, and missed the opportunity to get the shot off. There was a lot to kind of pick apart from that Rutgers game. So you got to give credit to Coach Hoiberg and the staff and obviously the team to be able to kind of draw that out. Now, all that being said, still going to be difficult to win on the road in the Big Ten. We're just seeing that all across the league. It's not a Nebraska problem alone. And so as we kind of look and pick apart Nebraska's resume and get nervous and here and there, just a reminder, every team across the country is kind of going through this thing. There's no undefeated team in Big Ten play. Nebraska got that big win, obviously, against Purdue. And so, as we kind of step back and kind of look at the total picture, things are good. Things are good for Nebraska at 14-5. You just kind of think too, the opposite of that could have happened, where Nebraska did have a long scoring drought as this game kind of progressed there in the second half, allowed Northwestern to get back in the game a few times. And then, like I said, kind of streaky, Nebraska was able to get the lead out. But there, especially down there, down the stretch, had Nebraska lost this game, it would just be another one. And then you don't have the old, it was on the road type of excuse. You got to protect home court. Nebraska was able to do that. By the way, too, if you were at the game, you would see one of the most special buckets made today was from a former Husker as well from midcourt. Eric Piatkowski was given 3 different opportunities to hit a midcourt shot, half-court shot, and hit the third one, banked it in. So I guess we can get. I don't know if the banks are open on Saturday. I think they are. So, but it's a it was a special moment. It was cool to see all the alumni jumping and getting up and rowdy around him. And at the time, Nebraska felt pretty good because it was a pretty good first half. We do have Austin Overman coming into the studio as well. If you are joining us via the Starter Heyman Jewelers video stream, I apologize. We're having a little bit of technical difficulties of getting him maybe on the screen, but we'll hear his voice and we'll continue to do this here as once again on our radio dial, we have NFL playoffs starting up, firing up, but here on the stream, we're just going to talk some Husker basketball, and so we don't necessarily have to take commercials. So that's kind of nice. We'll just kind of run right through this. The only problem with that is I might get tired and start running out of my voice, but thankfully, Austin Overman is here now and going to have his thoughts. Of course, he was at the game as well. We'll start with this because it was mentioned on the broadcast, Austin. It's hard to say you could have any problem with Tominaga's three, but a foul would have taken them to the line. In Nebraska, having a lead there, that would traditionally be your basketball, if you're a coach on the sideline, something that you would want to see happen, but it's Tominaga. So you go ahead and let him get the shot off.
You know, you do. Not pretty at all. I think it's a good win for the resume, but I don't know, Bach. Like, that was such a bailout shot. And Nebraska had really been relying on those for most of the last 6, 7, 8 minutes of that game. It's awesome that the Keisei Tominaga hit it, right? Nebraska made the play it had to make at the very end of the game. Strick and I sit next to each other at the game, didn't love the process, right? Didn't hold the follow through, really just chucked it up there, pulled the string, as Strick likes to say, but it went in, right? And that's what ultimately matters, is that it went in. It iced the game for Nebraska. What we're seeing with this team, Bach, is not always the highest level of basketball IQ, right? Sometimes it's not taking a shot they should. Sometimes it's taking a shot they shouldn't. Passing up a good shot, you know, a shot that's more in a player's wheelhouse, to dribble into traffic and go nowhere. We saw that so often down the stretch. And really the only reason that Nebraska escaped with a win is because Northwestern went cold at just the wrong time. The Wildcats had more than a few opportunities to take the lead. When it was 65-64, I think it was. They missed 2 open threes on a possession. And then even late, they missed a couple that would have cut it to 1 point again. So you absolutely do not apologize about the win, but Nebraska isn't suddenly fixed or solved by having put one back in the win column.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because that's what we do in sports is you take the end of the game with it's a win or loss. You completely run with the narrative in that direction, right? There was some sloppy plays, a lot of turnovers from Nebraska today. But I guess it just kind of depends on what your thoughts were coming into this game, because I thought that these teams are two pretty even teams. It was going to be a good matchup. And then without Gary, there was just this kind of fear, I think, in Nebraska Nation, just of thinking like, man, they're even as it is. Losing Gary, he's just kind of that glue piece, that big piece that can make that few extra plays in the game that might get them the win. How do you think that they did, specifically Alec jumping in the starting lineup, but how they did to kind of, as a team, cover what Gary usually brings to you?
I don't think Juwan Gary makes a huge difference in this game.
Interesting.
I really don't. Maybe he's matched up with Barnheiser more and he doesn't go for a game high 24 on 9 of 15. That's probably the matchup, but I don't know if Juwan Gary makes a huge difference here, right? Nebraska did struggle, a little bit rebounding, but they still, win it by 14. 11 offensive rebounds is a lot, but I think Nebraska did a pretty good job of covering for him. And that's why I said this week, Bach, I think Nebraska's pretty well equipped to handle this, right? Fred Hoiberg, Nate Lenzer, the rest of that staff proved they could put together a game plan with Juwan Gary out last year. And I think this team is deeper. So they know what it is Juwan Gary brings to the table. And I think Alec did a good job helping out there. Eli Rice wasn't a huge impact. Northwestern targeted him on defense a few times. CJ Wilcher, I thought, played pretty well overall. But yeah, Josiah Alec, I think, is the story, especially early on, right? I think he had 10 or 12 in the first half. Great from the free throw line. The thing that stood out to me about Josiah Alec, though, was he was out of control a few times. And this went to the whole team, right? I'm just going to point out Josiah Alec. I think it's easiest to, track him and see him with that big bouncing hair. Nebraska either got too aggressive or too passive. Nebraska didn't do a good job of finding that middle ground, right? Josiah Alec, again, good game for him, but I'm just going to point him out just because there are some examples that come to mind. So many times he would be playing outside himself, right outside his shoulders. His feet are wide. He's kind of trying to avoid dragging that pivot foot by moving that lead foot around. It looks like a travel. Got away with it. He was bodied on more than a few of them. But if you're under control, playing inside your shoulders, pressure doesn't bother you nearly as much because you're in a position to handle it. Even more than that, though, Bach, Nebraska was soft. Capital S, capital O, capital F, capital T today. I don't care that they won the rebounding battle by 14. Basically, all of Nebraska's turnovers were soft. One-hand passes, loose handle, and even mentally soft, right? Driving into traffic when you had a better spot-up shot, or you could have kept the ball moving. Overpassing, right? Teammate isn't expecting the pass when you go up for a layup, but you try to pass it. Or, I mean, Nebraska, again, got bailed out. They were not able to get good shots in the last 6-7 minutes of that game. Screening wasn't there. Sense of urgency on those cuts wasn't necessarily there. It was not a great performance by Nebraska. The fact they put up 75 points despite turning the ball over 18 times, that's pretty incredible. I think that speaks to just how boom or bust, I will say, Nebraska was today.
Yeah, it's I mean, 18 turnovers is a lot. 18 assists to go up against that kind of helped them get in the game because they did have some good, cut action today. But it was very hit or miss because, Mass hit a few of those and then he ended up with 5 turnovers. The lazy pass at half court that Barnhanger took and dunked it and really gave Northwestern a lot of momentum. That's as bad as it gets. So as far as lazy passes go. So
it was one-handed. And even here's the thing, Bach. Nebraska knew Northwestern was going to be in that passing lane, right? The book is out on what Nebraska wants to do on offense. Northwestern did, but not a lot of teams have. And they play that one step closer on the perimeter. So if Nebraska does make that soft kind of pass to reverse the ball, they'll just show with their inside hand to leave them in position to recover if they don't get it, but it either forces Nebraska out a step or they're in that passing lane, they're going the other way, right? Nebraska didn't jump to the ball. Nebraska didn't ball fake back cut. And Nebraska didn't change the passing, right? It was one hand. It was, I'm used to making this pass. I'm going to make it and move on. Nebraska didn't pay attention to the details nearly enough as they needed to.
Yeah, it was a game again that's I think the narrative's going to go by with the victory, and obviously Austin not letting it go, and fair enough because there were a lot of frustrating points in that. I did want to ask you this though, was because Nebraska did an unbelievable job against Boo Buie. I think that's hard to argue, as Boo Buie, one of the best guards in the nation, averages about 20 points per game, only finished with 9 on 2 made field goals today. I guess, why do you think they were effective against him? And then sometimes when you focus that much defense on one guy, somebody else has to step up. And for Northwestern, that was Barnhizer. He got his career high tonight. So, it's kind of, again, a little bit of good, a little bit of bad in the defensive category against the Wildcats.
I leaned over to Strick at halftime and said, this feels a little Tyson Walker-ish. Tyson Walker had 2 points at half of the Michigan State-Nebraska game, really took over in the second half. Nebraska didn't necessarily let that happen in the scoring column. I mean, you hold him to 2 of 15, 1 of 6 from 3, and 4 or 5 at the free throw line. But that 1 3 that he hit was a big one. It was a clutch one where I think it was Eli Rice that got lost, So yes, one-on-one, Jamarcus Lawrence, Sam Hoiberg, even Bryce Williams did a pretty good job. But what good players do is they're ready in the moment, right? 7 assists for Boo Buie to only 2 turnovers and the big 3 at the end. The shooting numbers are atrocious, right? Credit Nebraska for holding him down in that regard. But Boo Buie was still, I think, on the aggregate, a winning player for Northwestern today.
Yeah, I think that's fair enough. 7 assists it certainly helps out. Nebraska, by the way, will take on Northwestern later in the season. They're going to make the return trip to Evanston on the 20th, or excuse me, that's today. On the 7th, it'll be a Wednesday, February 7th. Is this the type of matchup? First of all, do you think these teams are pretty even? It was also interesting in that they both beat Purdue at home. Of course, the only Big Ten teams to do so. a return trip to Evanston, would you favor Nebraska after watching today or not so much?
I wouldn't. I totally agree that these are even teams because when you look at these two teams, I can't tell you what their strength is, right? We think of styles make fights, right? Purdue style is going to be play inside out through Edie, kick it out to shooters. You think about Illinois, defensive pressure is going to be their style. Michigan State, transition. Northwestern and Nebraska are both just solid at everything, but not overwhelmingly good at any one thing. I kind of thought Northwestern's undoing today would be the rebounding. They're like in the 350s in most rebounding categories, offensive, defensive, total per game. Not a good rebounding team, which is why I think the decision was to go with Josiah Allick in the starting lineup. Nebraska won it, didn't necessarily hammer it home. But yeah, you saw a game between two pretty evenly matched teams. I don't want to say Nebraska came out on top just because it was, at home. I think Nebraska got a road whistle at home in a lot of cases. That was not the best performance by this crew today. But I would assume Northwestern would be favored by probably the same 5.5, 6 points when Nebraska makes that return trip.
Yeah, I'd probably agree with you. I mean, we'll see. Obviously, a lot of depends on the momentum that each program has at that point. But yeah, and I did want to ask you too about Jamarcus Lawrence because this is one of his better like point total games. 4 turnovers though. Once again, 3 assists to kind of make up for that. It certainly helps to hit 2 big threes, 2 big corner threes, makes the stats look a lot better. Is he coming along to the point that, I mean, it's kind of late in the year to be talking about changes in the starting lineup, but how is that experiment going for you?
Jamarcus was better today. He had a couple nice, the assists were nice. He strung a play out and found, I don't know if it was Mast or Alec on one in the second half. Scoring was much better. Obviously, he took the right shots at the right time. He didn't necessarily force it chipped in with rebounding. So I have no problems with how Jamarcus Lawrence played in this game. I was a little curious the way Fred Hoiberg would go because Sam Hoiberg was still in the game as we were getting close to the U8 timeout. And Strick and I were kind of going back and forth. Do you finish with Jamarcus Lawrence? Do you finish with Sam Hoiberg for defense? Do you go offense, defense with them? And I was glad to see Fred Hoiberg go to Jamarcus Lawrence. He did a good enough job defensively, who didn't commit as many of the soft turnovers as the other players did. And I think he's still Nebraska's best guy with the explosiveness getting downhill. In a game that you want to get to the rack, drive and kick to open shooters, or get yourself to the free throw line, I think having the ball in Jamarcus Lawrence's hands late was going to be part of the plan. So I thought Jamarcus Lawrence had maybe not his best game of the year, but certainly one of his better games.
And then another question I think that I have that was very noticeable, and Tominaga again hits the big shot, is the hero today. But they did go to him a few times late in the shot clock, and that's seemingly a good idea because he can make bad shots. He took some bad shots on those shot clocks, including a shot clock violation.
He had a couple of them, and even CJ Wilcher had that one runner that they weren't full on, grenades, right? They weren't just given the ball with absolutely nothing to do except chuck a shot off, right? I mean, Keisei Tominaga has hit threes that would have been more contested than the ones he's taken. He had a guy on his right hip on one of them. If he shoots the jump shot there, the guy has to go through him or across him to contest, which is near impossible. But instead, he shot fakes. He dribbles into 2.5, 3 guys and flips up a tough one. Or he's being guarded by someone that's a little taller, a little longer than he is, and he dribbles into traffic where it's going to be tougher for him to get a shot off. He took away the space that he needed to get a shot off, which was a little confusing. He's hit the shot he hit before, at the end. So I was still a little surprised to see it go down. I don't think Nebraska deserved for that shot to go down, but that's part of the fun, right? That's why you have a guy like Keisei Tominaga, who, when he has the opportunity to make a play like that, he's the type of guy that lives for the moment. And that's why you have Keisei Tominaga on your team.
Well, and he's got a size deficit most of the times against guards that are guarding him. He has to find creative ways. He's a pretty good creative scorer. So sometimes you allow him to get away with a lot of the shenanigans, I suppose, that goes along with it.
And maybe I'm being unfair to Keisei too. Let's put the blame on a team concept, right? Because there weren't necessarily screens being set for him. So if you have 2 or 3 guys in that space late shot clock, if you're going to have that wing pick and roll, you either have to go middle if you're Keisei Tominaga to to space the defense out a little bit, give your guy in the corner opportunity, give Rink Masses the screener the opportunity to still pop, or the screener has to space to the top of the key and the backside guys have to clear out as well to let it be more of a one-on-one. Because what it turned into was kind of a no-win situation. Not enough space to use a pick and roll set, not enough space to do like a sidestep three like we've seen Casey do before, not enough room to try to wiggle around a guy because you have three guys standing in the same area, not really doing anything. Northwestern could have guarded that with 1.5 players. So it's not all on the decision-making from Casey. It was not the best spacing. There's no purpose to the late game offense, I would say.
Yeah. The other thing that I wanted to ask you too is Casey, with what comes along with him is sometimes some expressions. Against Rutgers, it was shushing the crowd. Today against Boo Booey, he creatively scored and then did the too small. I don't want to just ask you about Casey here in a second, but what do you think about that overall when a little guy goes in, scores on somebody? Do you think that that's overdone in basketball culture now?
I don't think the move that he made was one that warranted the too small, but I also think it's hilarious at the same time.
It doesn't have to be. It's just if you're a small guy that scores, that's what you do now. Like.
Right.
Down low. Yeah.
I think it's funny, too, because Boo Booey is a really good defender. One of the top guys in steals in the Big Ten last year. That's what made Northwestern so formidable defensively was him and Adige at the point of attack. I think they combined for something like 7 steals a game last year. It's Casey. It's hilarious. Overdone, probably, but meh.
Well, I was a little worried about it because it wasn't completely fair to his teammates because Boo was drawing the assignment of Casey Tamanaga on that end, but it was not the same way on the other side.
No.
So Casey was just poking at the bear and then going and guarding somebody else. So I thought that was kind of funny. Ultimately, Bowie did go down and try to get a 3-pointer, missed it on that next possession because that can make you angry, and you don't want to make Bowie angry in my mind, but he was getting frustrated enough just because his shots weren't falling. Communication with teammates at times on his lobs.
Everyone
out there
was frustrated. Chris Collins was working the refs within the first 2-3 minutes of the game. Fred Hoiberg was certainly not happy. PBA let the refs know about their performance. And I think Nebraska played frustrated. That's another one of my concerns for this team, Bach, is that for being such a veteran team that's seen a lot of college basketball, I get it. They're still human. They're allowed to be frustrated. But when you're frustrated, you don't back off. You don't play soft. You don't make the lazy passes because then you're going to get frustrated because you're giving up fast break points. Nebraska still, I think, needs that come to Jesus meeting. Hey, we got to screw our heads on straight. We're happy that we ended up getting this win, but we know we're better than this and we have to be better than this. You got to win at home. You get Ohio State coming in the building. They've been kind of up and down, but then it's back on the road, right? Nebraska can't afford to play this soft at home again because if they bring this act on the road, Maryland blows them out by 20.
Yeah. It's interesting because it's going to be a battle all year long, I think. And I kind of started to get away from it once they beat Purdue. It's well, maybe they'll be the top 4 team in the Big Ten, and maybe they will. But I think you're going to have this kind of battle of just don't get too far below 500. And if you can stay kind of there, that'll put you kind of in somewhat of a position, if not to win a little bit in the Big Ten tournament, to stamp your way in, to maybe be dancing on the right side of the bubble.
How about this for the standings? The 2 teams that are going back and forth at the top right now are Wisconsin and Purdue. They both have 6 wins. Illinois is at 4-2 in the conference. They do get Terrence Shannon Jr. back. Curious to see how they reintegrate him into the team. Northwestern 4-3, Nebraska 4-4, 1 up on Northwestern. Indiana 4-4, Nebraska a game up on them on tiebreaker. Ohio State 3-4 comes to town on Tuesday. Minnesota 3-4, Nebraska's down a game to them. Iowa 3-4, Nebraska's down a game. Michigan State 3-4, Nebraska's up a game. Maryland 3-4, Penn State 3-5. It's a logjam in the middle, right? So I don't think Nebraska is going to go on this big, long losing skid like we've seen in years past to end up, 3, 4, 5 games below 500 in the conference. But I also don't know if Nebraska is tough enough mentally to sustain such a long winning streak to get 3, 4, 5 games above 500 in the Big Ten Conference. I think this is a team that ends up between 8-12 and 12-8 in the conference. But I still think 10-10 is probably the most likely outcome for this team. That's just what they're going to be. They'll win games ugly. They might have, another dominating performance in them. But I think games like tonight that are played within a single-digit margin are going to be the norm. So get your heartburn pills now, Husker Hoops fans.
Yeah. There's a lot of pretty good teams in the Big Ten. We'll just say that are going to be giving it to you on a nightly basis. Like you said, Nebraska's next game will be at home against Ohio State, 6 p.m. on Tuesday. If you're not going to go to the game, hopefully that Peacock subscription is still going, because I know that's a talking point among any Big Ten fan base, is having to buy Peacock. Do they have NFL? They probably past Wildcard Weekend don't have any Peacock
Yeah, I
NFL
don't think
games.
they do.
Probably not, but yeah.
Maybe some hockey? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't mind. You got Peacock?
I do not.
You do not. Did you buy it for when you in any of these?
Also did not.
No.
Well, I might be able to bum it off a friend though, because I think they were over and they still might be logged in.
Yeah,
so I'm gonna cross my fingers and hope for that.
Well, it's funny because it's like $6 and people really complain about it. If you remember back in the days, like obviously there were more games than not only on the radio, but
right,
especially when it was like, okay, a network didn't pick you up and you did a pay-per-view. That was very expensive. It wasn't $6.
It's like $15-20, right?
Yeah.
I don't know what my parents paid for it.
I don't know what they paid either. They told me it was expensive.
Right.
So I'm assuming it was more than $6. But that will be fun. Nebraska looking against Ohio State. And that's probably a very good, just like we were saying, it's not an obvious win for Nebraska. It's not an obvious win for Ohio State. Obviously you want to protect home court, but be a tough matchup.
This is where I think Juwan Gary would be big for Nebraska against Jamison Battle, who's given Nebraska fits before in the past. Again, Ohio State started off the year really well. They had a weird year in the Big Ten last year. Finished in the bottom 4, probably more talented than that, but that was Chris Holtman's first bad year at Ohio State. I don't think he should have been on the hot seat by any means, but he needed a big bounce back. He got it. They do lose on the road at Michigan, which we've seen winning on the road in the Big Ten is tough if you're not, Wisconsin or Purdue at this point. But Michigan is just not that good. So I don't fully know what to make of Ohio State just yet. But like you've said, like Strick has said all year long, just find a way to win at home.
Well, it's interesting too, because a few more talking points before we get out of here. Nebraska has been launching threes basically this year. They're kind of among leaders of the Big Ten in shooting the threes. Only 7 of 13 tonight, which is a good percentage, by the way. But whereas Northwestern shot up 31 and ended up hitting 10, a little bit more, obviously a little bit less as far as percentage goes for Nebraska. Actually, quite a bit less, about 20% less. But what did you think about the attacking the rim, or just in the game to be a little less 3 dependent?
I don't think it was that they were less 3 dependent necessarily. They turned the ball over 18 times. I think they would have had, 5-6 more opportunities from 3, but you also saw a concerted effort to go to Josiah Allick early, right? He had a mismatch. They worked to get it to Josiah Allick inside, which led to his season high in points. Northwestern did a better job of communicating and switching off of that to not give Nebraska nearly as many of those easy opportunities in the second half. But you saw it against Rutgers. You saw it against Iowa as well. It's really the turnovers, I think, Bach, that kept Nebraska's numbers down. I think they had some opportunities if they had, gotten into their secondary action to get some more threes up, but the turnovers prevented them from getting there. You have to be able to win, multiple ways. I saw this tweet from, I don't remember who. I'm going to try to pull it up here as I'm talking about it, but it appears my Wi-Fi is on the fritz. I think it was Nebraska takes the 8th lowest percentage of shots from the mid-range, which is kind of what we wanted to expect from a Fred Hoiberg team when he first got to Nebraska. So I think Nebraska is playing more of a Fred Hoiberg style, but you still have to be able to pull out that mid-range trump card, right? DeMarcus Lawrence hit that one over the big early on in the second half. And if Northwestern's bigs are going to drop and give you the mid-range pull-up, I'd rather you take that than drive at someone who's going to swat your shot. And I'd rather Nebraska, take wide open spot up threes. But if Keisei Tominaga, if CJ Wilts or Bryce Williams are going to get run off the 3-point line, they can't be afraid to shot fake, take that 1 or 2 dribbles into the mid-range and pull it at the same time.
Yeah, we'll have to see if they do a little bit more of that. Like you said, not necessarily Fred Hoiberg's offense, but Strick has mentioned that as well as being something that they could maybe add to the offense a little bit. And you're right, by the way, maybe they would have taken more shots. They ended up with 47 of them, 26 of 47 from the field, 55%. Whereas Northwestern had 63 shots, had 16 more shots on the goal for Northwestern. Usually that can get you a win, but again, Nebraska's defense was pretty good here and there. At least I would say it's a, like you said, it's not one that you were would hang up on the fridge, I suppose.
You kind of have to at this point because you snap a 2-game losing streak, right? So you absolutely do not complain about it, but you can't hang your hat on it either, right? There's plenty of work that Nebraska has to do.
Yeah. This is the Hoops Post Game Show brought to you by Action Plumbing, Heating, AC, and Electrical. Once in a while, you see Strick join us. Most of the time,
he's busy, alumni
games,
weekend,
but he is specifically busy because of alumni weekend. And that was a joy. Did that bring a little? Every year, I like to see some of the former players out there and just reminisce on past times.
Yeah, it was fine. A lot of alums in the building. They were seated right behind the bench. I thought Nebraska did a really good job with it this year.
Yeah. And Pike's half-court shot.
Man, he at least hit the backboard and the rim on his first 2 attempts, unlike another former Husker alum that may or may not do a show with me from 2 to 4.
That's right.
And cashed the last one.
Yes, absolutely. I don't know if he needs that trip to Houston, but he's going to take it. So
right.
That'll be cool. Once again, Nebraska beats Northwestern 75-69, improved to 14-5 overall on the season for your Huskers, and up to 4-4 in Big Ten play. Once again, our next Hoops Post Game Show will be after the Ohio State game on Tuesday, which once again, purchase Peacock if you don't have it, or go to Pinnacle Bank Arena and cheer on your Huskers. Thanks for joining us. We are going to go ahead and call it a day as the NFL playoffs have started. I know a lot of people's attention is probably getting to that, and we have that on our radio dial. So
we do.
If you are you listening to us now on the stream, go ahead and turn your radio on and listen to some NFL playoffs. But that'll wrap it up for us here from the Hoops Post Game Show. Thanks you once again for listening to myself, Jake Bachman, Austin Orman alongside me. Nebraska wins 75-69. Thanks again, and have a nice weekend.